Welcome to this episode of Life Science Success. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don, and I'm a digital marketer in life sciences. And before we bring on our guest today, I have just a brief message from our sponsor.
This episode of Life Science Success is brought to you by D3 Digital Media Marketing. Dive into the digital world with confidence and creativity on your side. D3 Digital Media Marketing is your all-in-one solution for making a lasting impact online. From the vibrant, engaging world of social media marketing, podcasts, and webinars to the strategic depths of website development, SEO, pay-per-click, email, and content marketing, we tailor our approach to fit your unique brand story. Let's elevate your presence, connect with your audience, and drive success together. Your digital journey starts here. Visit d3digitalmedia.com to learn more.
My guest today is Dr. Sam Clark. He is the founder and CEO of Terran Biosciences, a leading biotech company in neuropsychiatric therapeutics. And so with that, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. And, it's interesting to me to see all the initials after your name, because as somebody that I tell everybody that my education came through this really hard pathway where I just sort of resisted it all along the way and then just kept going, okay, I'll keep going. So I'm very interested in hearing about you and what more specifically led you, on your journey, especially through your education. So maybe we kind of start with, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and then what brought you to life sciences? Let's start there.
Sure. So my journey into biotech really started when I was younger. I had a number of family members and friends who suffered from severe mental illnesses, specifically bipolar disorder and neuropsychiatric conditions, dementia, Alzheimer's disease. And so I really wanted to help make a difference and build better treatments, because I saw the treatments they were getting were really inadequate and they had side effects and just left a lot to be desired. So I went to MIT and I did neuroscience there as an undergrad. And then I went to Columbia where I finished my MD and my PhD. Now, it was during those doctor years that I realized that, look, the treatments we have available are woefully inadequate and new treatments are being developed at a pace that's just too slow. So instead of going and continuing in medicine, I decided to found a biotech company to help address this slow pace of development and help bring new treatments to patients who are suffering.
Yeah, well, it's woefully needed, as you said, and something that I feel like is more and more a focus. I just recently, also did a different interview, very focused on new Alzheimer's treatments, and I feel like I've gotten more and more of those throughout my time. I felt like very early on, most of the interviews here on the podcast were very oncology focused. So we talked a lot about cancer drugs and things like that. And now I feel like there are certain bifurcations where you're getting more and more into, different types of medicine for pain, for, neuropsychiatric, therapies, et cetera. So, yeah.
Yeah, precision medicine is really the future. And that's really one of the things we focused on at Terran is figuring out better, new innovative treatments with new mechanisms and improved profiles that we could get to patients at an affordable price point.
So why don't you tell me a little bit more about founding Terran then? So what led you to that point where you just said, hey, look, I want to stand a company up to go do this?
Sure. So I was in medical school and I was going through the different rotations and seeing patients. And I said, look, the treatments we're giving patients often are based on mechanisms of action of drugs that were invented in the 1960s and 70s. Antipsychotic original mechanisms, these are ancient, antidepressants, SSRIs, things from the 80s. Before that, when I mentioned the MAO inhibitors, So in general, it was just rehashing old mechanisms, and patients need modern technology, new mechanisms. Now, I was also looking at biotech companies, but rather than go work for another biotech, I said, look, the pace of drug development is slow, but I was very inspired by what I saw in Silicon Valley, where tech companies were able to move very quickly towards solving problems. So I founded Terran with the goal of bringing new treatments quickly, and I modeled it after the fast-moving tech companies of Silicon Valley. So instead of having that slow, bulky, hierarchical structure, we have a more flat organizational structure, which enables a team of highly capable operators to bring on teams of world experts around solving specific problems. And doing that, we've been able to actually solve some previously thought to be impossible issues in drug development and have some really exciting therapeutics that we're bringing forward.
That's, I mean, it's great to hear, and especially the organizational approach as well. I recently mentioned, on one of the episodes as well, that I had worked with an organization in terms of, designing the organization more around work pods instead of, the siloed structure of old. And that, we're seeing greater efficiency, as well, due to that shift. And so, a lot of the belief that you have to be very structured in a certain way definitely could be challenged in terms of what it brings in terms of its bureaucracy and just slow pace.
Yes, absolutely.
And
I
so what
completely
some
agree
of
with you.
what are some of the greatest things, I guess, that people that if they walked in the door today have to overcome whenever they look at the organizational structure that you have?
Well, I don't think there's anything unusual to overcome per se. We're just highly efficient. It's actually easy to do work at Terran. We remove barriers to making it easy to get things done.
That's also important. And yeah, so definitely important to hear about. What are some of the innovative projects or programs that you currently have going on?
Sure, happy to chat. So, the first one, our biggest breakthrough to date, is something called TER-XT, and that stands for Terran Xanomeline Trospium. Now, I'll give you a little background. Uh, Antipsychotic mechanisms haven't been updated in 50 years. The classic and atypical antipsychotics have the same mechanism we've been using for a long time. However, uh, there's been a new class of drugs developed targeting the muscarinic receptor system in the brain through a drug called xanomeline. Now, xanomeline has to be combined with trospium to remove side effects. Xanomeline reaches the brain, but trospium is maintained in the peripheral system and blocks any peripheral gastrointestinal and other side effects of xanomeline. Now, xanomeline was originally developed as a drug called CAR-XT, which is a
Oh, sure.
twice daily oral drug. Now, with a twice daily oral, the issue there is that as a twice daily oral, that's not necessarily the most ideal for patients with schizophrenia who typically take drugs as a once daily oral, and it lacks the long acting injectable form of that drug. Now, a large part of the reason why that's the case is xanomeline is an old molecule. It was invented in the 1990s, 92. And trospium is a 1960s molecule. So these haven't been updated in a long time. Now, so what we did at Terran is we created the world's first long-acting prodrugs of that. Now, let me tell you what a prodrug is first. A prodrug is when you take that original molecule and you attach a little side chain to the side. And that side chain enables better pharmacokinetics where you can get it in the body more effectively. And then the side chain is removed, allowing that original molecule to reach the brain. And that strategy has already been applied to many other antipsychotics to make long acting forms, but it hadn't been applied to xanomeline. In fact, initially, our team thought it was impossible because of the molecular configuration of xanomeline's nitrogen. But through technique of quaternizing the nitrogen, we were able to figure out a way to do it. We made approximately 700 total prodrugs, and these have shown big advantages over original xanomeline in preclinical animal studies. We hope to use these to bring a once daily form and a long-acting injectable with a multi-month duration to patients at an affordable price point.
That's excellent. Is now one of the things that people didn't get to hear beforehand. You had told me that the very nice background that you have is one of your molecules. Is that the one that you
Yes.
just described? So
That's xanomeline. That's
if you
right.
don't mind, I'm going to bring just you back up so people can get kind of the broader view of this as well. So yeah, I'll leave it up to you to talk about that. But is the squiggly line over your head the longer lasting squiggly line?
So this is the original xanomeline. It's an artistic representation of xanomeline with one extra carbon, because of the way we could put it together. But the thing is that this is not our longer acting prodrug. This is that squiggly line is the original part of xanomeline. The longer acting prodrug has a second squiggly line. That this one is the original inspiration for our breakthrough.
Yeah, it's very, very helpful. I mean, given the fact that you gave me the insight early on, I couldn't help but use that as an actual example as well. Even though people, I'm sure, can't see the full diagram, or background right now.
Sure. And one thing we like about this molecule is you can change the color to whatever design you really want at the time. It's a lot of fun. We're going to
Yeah.
add a giant trospium on the other side.
Oh, very cool. Yeah. Any other breakthroughs or projects that you want to talk about before we move a little bit deeper?
Sure. Another big breakthrough was an older antipsychotic under development that was brand new mechanism. So there was a new mechanism of antipsychotic developed 20 years ago, where they showed that by adding on this drug called idazoxan, which is a selective alpha 2 blocker, to existing antipsychotic regimens, you can double the efficacy of the baseline antipsychotic. It was a huge breakthrough. The problem was the drug had to be given 4 times a day. And so development was stopped. They couldn't figure out how to make it a once daily drug. It was tragic because patients and their families were calling, begging to be put back on that drug for years after, but no one could get access again. And no drug with that mechanism has ever been FDA approved. So there's nothing on the market, new mechanism completely. We went to France, got the rights to that drug from Pierre Fabre, brought it back, finished manufacturing, and successfully built a once daily form. And with that new once daily form, we just put in over 100 healthy volunteers to show that it shows a perfect once daily profile. We fixed the molecule previously thought to be impossible to fix, and are really excited to move that forward towards patients with schizophrenia. Ultimately, we think it could be one of the world's first adjunctive treatments where it can potentially double the efficacy of baseline antipsychotic treatments. That's our goal.
Excellent. That's great to hear. And so let's talk a little bit about the way that you approach development and optimization of psychedelic compounds for patient use. So, I mean, what is it that makes your approach different, I guess?
Okay, so we have a few differences. So these fit in 3 categories. So let's talk about the first category. First category is the idea that with psychedelic compounds, they're associated with a multi-hour trip. Now, that could be good for some patients, but that could also limit market access for a lot of patients who don't have time for that trip. The FDA said, a doctor has to be present during that time. So if that's the case, that can be very expensive. That can be cost prohibitive. So not everyone wants a psychedelic trip. If we could maintain the benefits of psychedelics without everyone having to take the long trip every time, that could be very beneficial for all those other patients. Now, scientists have discovered that if you take a psychedelic and you combine it with a selective second compound that only blocks the receptor that causes the trip, you could maintain the ability of that psychedelic to act on all the other receptors. So we're very excited by this. Now, that data, though, is in animal models. And as you may know, scientists have already cured all diseases known to mouse kind, but it doesn't necessarily translate to humans. So we put that in a human study where we showed that psychedelics without the trip still was able to maintain the full functional connectivity, the rewiring of the brain that psychedelics do with no trip at all. We did that with LSD. And we're going to develop that into what we hope to be a take-home medication for helping patients with depression and other conditions. Now, the second category is classic psychedelics with the trip. Now, why would we need to develop that? Well, I'll tell you why. That is because this fits into Terran's mission of making sure patients have access to accessible, affordable medications. Now, what we saw in the psychedelic space was a lot of companies were jumping in and they were setting up very strong IP barriers around psychedelics, patents. They were setting up patents that could potentially block out anyone from using those psychedelics or marketing them for up to 20 years. Compounds like psilocybin, LSD, old compounds that should be largely off patent now. So we said, well, they were doing an innovative strategy to do this. What they were doing was they were saying, look, because the FDA regulates the crystal structure of drugs, even though the original drug is off patent, if they could control the crystal structure of the drug, they could control the drug, because ultimately any drug would have to be that crystal structure that the FDA regulates. So it's like a secondary way of controlling an off patent drug by controlling the crystal structure that everyone has to use. Well, there was a problem. Psilocybin was only thought to exist in 3 crystal configurations, and there was thought that no more could be formed. Unfortunately, all 3 had already been patented, and that threatened to potentially create a patent monopoly around psilocybin. So at Terran, we developed the world's first new salts and crystal forms of psilocybin, something thought to be impossible before. That enables us to do what we believe to bypass any barriers or what's called Orange Book exemptions that could prevent affordable treatments from reaching the patients. And so we did the same for MDMA. Those patents have been granted now to Terran, so we have completely new forms that'll bypass those other forms so that we can get affordable treatments on the market and not have the market be cornered by any one company. And we've done this also. We have patents pending on LSD. We got a patent granted on world's first new forms of orally active DMT and 5-methoxy DMT. And we're moving very quickly on a bunch of other psychedelics. So we're really excited to break through those IP barriers on behalf of patients. That's something that I want to spend one more moment on, because this has come up in the news a lot. The idea of what's called an Orange Book 30-month stay. It's an exemption based on when you get a drug approved and it's protected by patents. You list those patents in the Orange Book, and companies file to block other companies from going to market, and they could delay the entry by 30 months just by accusing someone of infringing their patent. So by using totally new forms, we believe those would be frivolous, be dismissed immediately, and have no impact on our ability, and thus unlock those markets for patients again. And then, I'll just finish one last thing then. On the third category is then these new psychoplastogens that have no trip at all, without combining classic psychedelics with receptor blockers. Just natively, they're able to rewire the brain without inducing any hallucinations as a native property of the drug. And we have that. And then I forgot, there is a 4th category, and that is a selective blocker alone that's able to tailor the duration of any psychedelic trip to any duration. And that's another thing we've licensed from Sanofi, and we're developing. I'm very excited about. So that's all 4 categories.
Yeah, back to your patent comment overall. I mean, it's interesting to me to hear, just, I guess, people coming into the market and essentially trying to, block people from developing overall, any form of psychedelics just by holding those patents. And also, I don't feel like the general public, would know enough about the level of, I guess, control, but then also the, just to be able to out-license, that capability then adds additional cost, adds additional time. Who knows whether or not if it's beneficial to the company in the end. And so, I mean, for me, it's really interesting to hear how you found your way through, as well. And a definitely innovative approach. And hopefully, somebody else that's listening says, well, to themselves, well, I wonder if that would work here. I wonder, because there's probably somebody else that's been dealing with the same issue in a different form. I would imagine
that's right.
Somewhere else. So
at Terran, we break through barriers to patient access.
So the name Terran, where does it come from?
The people of the earth, terra firma, and also the lunar highlights on the moon. So it speaks to our ambitions to really elevate these therapeutics and also to help everyone on the planet. Terran are referred to as like the earth people. It's another word for earthling.
So my next question was really centered around this idea of the roadblocks or barriers that you might have run into, and I feel like you covered a few of them. Are there any more that you would highlight, as well, that you feel like you've ran into that just seem like they're true, barriers, but at the same time, also how did you, find your way through?
We've run into a lot of barriers in development. I mean, I mentioned some IP barriers that we're breaking through on behalf of patients, but in development, there's many. You always run into development challenges, things people say are impossible. That drug idazoxan was discontinued 20 years ago because they said we cannot make a once daily drug out of a 4 times a day drug. It can't be done. Well, initially, but this speaks to our unique structure at Terran that enables us to do this. So we went around. We found teams that thought they could do it. They looked at, oh, we can't do it. But then we found one person. That person had multiple long-acting release drugs on the market. This was the world's expert of formulation, and the person was actually about to retire. And we said, look, can you fix this drug? And we said, look at what it would mean for patients with schizophrenia. There are no drugs on the market like this. If you could fix it, that would be amazing. And that person said, all right, well, I'm going to retire, but I'll do this as one of my last projects. And they came on board. They figured out a way to do it. And we got the once daily drug. And so the idea is we've done this with multiple things. We did it with TerraXT when we were creating prodrugs people thought couldn't be made. People told us you can't make new salts of polymorph psilocybin. It's a Zwitter ion. And that's just fancy language to say it has a positive end and a negative end in the same molecule. And those things just don't form salts. That's just a chemical fact. But we got them to form salts. And the idea is that by pulling on teams of world experts and really attacking the IP from or the problem from a team of real of expertise and bring that structure where we really bring on the people that can solve those problems. That's what's enabled us to break through those barriers, because usually there's somebody in the world that can fix a problem. You just have to find who.
Right. Yeah,
And
absolutely.
at Terran, we never take the that when someone says it's impossible, we say, okay, we'll find a way to do it. Almost nothing is truly impossible when you have enough brain power. And what it means when they say it's impossible is impossible for them. That
Mhm.
doesn't mean it's impossible for someone else. And so we find a way to get it done.
Yeah, I mean, so many things have been so many times that's been proven true, that the barriers that we think exist aren't really barriers. They're just personal limitations. And if we continue to believe that way, we will stay limited by them, for sure.
That's right. I mean, look, the medical field has been limited many times in the past. It used to get prescribed, cocaine and opiates for children for sleep things, and doctors even recommended smoking at certain times in the past. Things like that. The medical field gets continually updated. We throw out bad ideas. We move to an evidence-based model. And at Terran, we're big on following the evidence. We have a rule at Terran: no one's allowed to say "trust me" ever. It's trust with data. There is absolutely, we made this rule early. Nobody's allowed to, if we have a controversial issue of some development, someone says, oh, it's just this, just trust me, I have the experience. And that doesn't fly here. It has to be data based. We don't care how many years of experience someone has. There has to be a data based decision for everything we do.
Very important point, Sam. So, in my last few questions, I'm going to focus primarily on you. What's the greatest
Sure.
leadership advice that you've ever received?
That's a very good question, and I've received a number of good points. But I think one of the most important pieces of advice was you have to be very careful how you pick your team members. And this also goes back to an example we saw with Steve Jobs at Apple, Steve Jobs is widely credited for, quote, keeping the bozos out of Apple. And, he talks a lot about the idea that if you have A players, they like to attract other A players. But once you have B players, they attract C players. And then you have people kind of coming in, they're not really dedicated, they're not really motivated, and then it frustrates the whole team. And so at Terran, we've just been very careful to have really highly motivated operators with attention to detail, and we find the world experts that can solve problems.
Also important. The next question is, what inspires you?
What inspires me is that we're doing something that if we didn't do it, nobody would do it. So, for example, idazoxan, that drug was discontinued, shelved, and abandoned. When we went to France to get the drug, they said, "Well, it's a great thing you showed up because the 25-year expiration on throwing out all of the old clinical data is just about up. If you came a little later, it would all be gone." And the idea is if we didn't come and there's no drug in the world that has ever been approved with a selective alpha 2 mechanism. And there's none under development right now other than ours. And if we didn't get there and get this drug, that drug with a 50-year history of potential benefits could have been just wiped out and forgotten forever. So it motivates us to remember there are patients suffering who need access to these drugs. And if we don't do it, nobody else, this is the last chance that drug will get. And so we really need to make sure that we do everything right. Patients are counting on us to get that done, and that helps motivate us every day. Because at the end of the day, we have to remember, while we move like a fast-moving tech company, we're not just here developing the next dating app. Well, the decisions we make could influence patients' lives and save lives. And so that keeps us motivated every day.
Well, thank you for sharing that. What concerns you?
What concerns me is anytime there are delays in bringing treatments to patients. We saw what's not proven to be a delay yet, but threatens to produce barriers. So it's with the recent AdCom panel vote for MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. While the AdCom raised important points about the need for more safety and documentation, those are things that could be addressed in a comprehensive REMS program and post-marketing surveillance. It was disappointing, though, to see the committee bring up two main issues. A primary issue being the idea of functional unblinding, that patients who could figure out that they were on the drug, that could just explain the fact that 70% of the patients in that trial were essentially cured of PTSD that they had had for over a decade. Repeating things like that essentially repeats stereotypes that these mental conditions are just under conscious control. And we're not talking about a trial with a tiny effect size. We're really not sure. We're talking about a massive effect size, huge benefit. So things like that, and as well as stereotypes raised at the committee meeting where they said, well, this MDMA use in the clinical setting could lead to cocaine and alcohol abuse at home, where there's no data to support that at all, is disappointing. And those are the things that concern us when things like that we thought the field had already moved past. Old things from the war on drugs that, oh, psychedelics are a gateway drug. You take them once and then you go use cocaine and alcohol. To hear the committee chair just repeat that at the meeting just last week, say people go home and use cocaine and alcohol after an approved session was definitely concerning. But we're hoping to play a role in moving the field forward.
I was having a similar conversation with my wife earlier today around cannabinoid, centered drugs as well. Similar sort of thing that, one of the recent interviews that I had, the person that was the guest, essentially was saying, hey, look, we've removed the impact of THC, but, kept the pain relieving, capability of the cannabinoid based drug. And so, a definite benefit to patients, but there are other people that I've worked with in the past that I feel like could contribute to this company's benefit. And they won't work with companies that are working on cannabinoid based drugs. And it's like, well, I mean, I half understand your point, but I don't really understand your point. So, yeah, I mean, I just sort of struggle sometimes with like, when medicine could be based on a molecule or a plant, that molecule or plant can come from a lot of different spaces, and how you use it or whether it's been abused before is something I think we have to sort of see through, especially whenever you have the medical profession involved. And, I think there are a lot of reasons why you can have, some level of oversight and watch what happens with these patients longer term, and continue to provide input that leads to better drugs and better inputs in the future. So this is a ongoing scientific, cycle that I feel like we're all in. But yeah, I feel a portion of what you're concerned about as well.
We have to remember that These plants have been around since the beginning of humanity. They predate humans. And it's essentially a fundamental human right to be able to try to heal your own body by accessing what nature has already made available. And in that sense, denying people access to this, or treatment delayed essentially, is a treatment denied. And there are a lot of patients suffering. And so we need to move quickly to bring them access to these compounds.
Oh, so true. Last question. What excites you?
Well, this is an adventure. We're blazing new territory. We're developing, things. When we make a discovery, for example, new prodrugs or this TerraXT, this is something that's never been done before. When we made the first long-acting idazoxan, that was something people thought were impossible. In this sense, this is something that is completely new, and we love being the first people to observe it. It's a humbling feeling, and we're really excited by that. Ultimately, the most exciting thing is making a difference to bring these treatments to patients who need them.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that one as well. So, Dr. Sam Clark, thank you for coming on the Life Science Success Podcast. And thank you for telling us about all the great work that you're doing at Terran Biosciences. And I wish you a lot of luck in the future. I mean, I know that this is not easy work either. I mean, you're talking about all the barriers that you guys overcome. So a lot of credit to your team and to the way that you've developed your ways of working at Terran as well.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks a lot.